This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive ScottishVisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour from Exclusive Scottish Visits, and welcome to my Letter from Scotland, the Unique Scotland news podcast that brings you the latest news from the United Kingdom with a Scottish slant. It gives you an insight into what makes Scotland tick. It takes newsprint, TV and radio commentary and turns it into a bite-sized viewpoint from a local perspective, with a slightly humorous edge. And when a Scottish politician states that the man is a delusional bully, an advocate of climate denial and other dangerous conspiracy theories, who could he be talking about, and why is he so angry? Well, it's all here, and apart from some stormy political statements, I'll be bringing you the latest in the turbulent world of Scottish politics, a bit of COVID news, an update on the royal family's holiday in Scotland, and a story of triumph over adversity. So sit back and enjoy your newsletter from Scotland with John Harbour of Exclusive Scottish Visits. I had a slight panic today when the Scotsman newspaper, and that is the Edinburgh-based broadsheet, reported that being over 6 feet tall more than doubles the probability of catching COVID-19 through aerosol transmission as opposed to larger droplets at lower levels. Well, as a 6 feet 1 inch specimen, I broke out in a cold sweat at the thought of my slim chances of catching the disease suddenly rising disproportionately on the basis of my height. I've been walking around now all day with my head bowed in the hope that those pesky aerosol-transmitted particles will pass me by. But then another thought crossed my mind. If the aerosol particles don't get me, the larger droplets at lower levels will. So, a dilemma. Anyway, I've resorted to my normal posture and have decided to take my chances at the higher altitude. The data is backed up apparently by a team of scientists in UK, Norway and the US. Scary stuff, and yet there's so much scary stuff around at the moment that the only way, as I see it, to avoid any virus, plague or Black Death is to squirrel myself away on an uninhabited Scottish island for a few months, only to emerge when the latest crisis is over. Then I started thinking again, when is the latest crisis ever over? If some epidemiological problem doesn't get you, then a fire, a stabbing, shooting, car crash, drowning, gassing, or a multitude of other crises will hasten your demise and a meeting with the Almighty. So, with that thought in mind, that deserted Scottish island swims back into view, and just as I'm trying to get my mind off the subject to concentrate on the newsletter from Scotland, an article pops up on my screen about a deserted Scottish island for sale in the middle of Loch Lomond, and it's called Inchconnecan. Now that name seems familiar, so I tuck this information away for now and we'll come back to it later. Okay, now that I have talked myself down and resumed my previous 6 foot 1 inch posture, I return to the main task of giving you an overview of what is happening in Scotland today. So, with one eye on spectacular headlines and the other on the real world, I'd like to start by giving you a catch-up on our COVID-19 situation here in the land of whiskey and heather. Now, I can hear the groans of many who probably feel they've heard enough about COVID, but it might not be as bad for you as you think. If I tell you, for example, that the UK has per capita the largest death toll attributed to COVID-19, then I know that all my foreign listeners will breathe a sigh of relief knowing that whatever mess they seem to be in, there's always another country worse off than them. It's just human nature. Of course, I can't say with any certainty exactly what the numbers of COVID deaths in this country are because each country uses different criteria. For example, when Europe's fatalities were increasing to the thousands figure, Russia was reporting COVID cases in the tens, not even the hundreds. North Korea was similarly reprieved, and many other communist dictatorships appear to be beating the virus. It's as if a huge iron curtain was drawn across those countries and they were impervious to this nasty disease. And the suggestion that Russia was trying to steal Cambridge vaccine secrets can't be true if they have so few cases. So come on, you democracies, get a grip. Now, the problem with writing a newsletter is that there is news coming off the press almost every second, and even as I record this, a news flash has appeared at the bottom of my screen to say that Russia has developed a vaccine and is putting it into use. Indeed, the story goes on. President Putin, and I'm reading now, President Putin has declared that his daughter Svetlana has been given the vaccine. Well, I'm not sure what that proves, but he seems very proud of the fact that they are the first. Anyway, I was going on to say that whilst we have had a reprieve in the last month or so from the virus and numbers of cases were dropping, there does appear, sadly, to be a second wave sweeping Europe. In truth, anyone with half a brain cell could work out that if you lock down for months with no direct contact between human beings, the virus literally can't spread. So if all of a sudden you open the doors to socialising once more, well, funny old thing, the virus takes a hold again. At this very moment, the government is agonising over which countries should be given access to the United Kingdom and Scotland, without visitors having to spend 14 days in quarantine. And we've also just had a tightening of the rules regarding the wearing of face masks in pubs, restaurants, beauty salons and supermarkets, etc. Well, this is the new norm. Face masks, social distancing, and it'll remain like that until we can get a vaccine. It will be intriguing to see where we are in 1 month's time, so I will keep you updated on the latest COVID news. Turning more to Scotland now, the political situation is interesting. Sorry to use the words politics and interesting in the same sentence, but the United Kingdom, of which Scotland is a part, the United Kingdom politically is straining at the seams. It's probably better to say we live in interesting times, although interesting and scary times is a better way of putting it. And that's because we are approaching a crossroads. Well, actually, we are arriving at a crossroads that we have visited in the recent past. And that recent past was in 2014 when Scotland went to the polls in a referendum to decide if Scotland should become an independent country. The result was pretty clear, 55% against and 45% for independence, on a turnout of 84.5%, which was an extremely impressive result and set a record for any turnout election held in the UK since 1918. So you can see the people of Scotland were mightily motivated to have their say. Now, that was only 6 years ago, and all parties agreed that this vote would be a once-in-a-lifetime event. Actually, the word once in a generation was regularly quoted, but the spectre of another referendum rears its head once more. And knowing that this letter from Scotland will reach a considerable Scottish diaspora around the world, you're probably wondering why this question is being asked again. Furthermore, when I am touring with clients, especially from America, I'm often asked why the question is being asked again so soon after the referendum. Of course, I remain apolitical, so would never comment on the political aspect of Scottish affairs, but in simple terms, what drives the call from some quarters of Scotland is nationalism. And whatever the outcome of the previous referendum, the very nature of nationalism would never allow the matter to rest there. So the Scottish Nationalist Party are on a mission, again, and the other parties in the Scottish Devolved Assembly are trying to push back against this tide of freedom fighters. The other parties, by the way, are the Conservative and Unionist Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, and the Scottish Green Party, led by a vocal individual called Patrick Harvie, and more of him later. So these parties are the opposing forces to the ruling Scottish National Party, and all seem united in firstly stopping another referendum on independence, now called IndyRef 2, and defeating them should the situation arise where another referendum was actually held. The key to this, of course, lies with central government in Westminster, in the mother of all parliaments, and the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has made it quite clear that he will not sanction another referendum. So, stalemate. But there is much more of this to come, because the Scottish Devolved Assembly, and I use this term instead of Scottish Parliament so as not to confuse, certainly those of you who are abroad, not to confuse you with the UK Parliament, have their Scottish elections in May next year. So the Scottish Assembly have their Scottish elections in May next year, 2021. the Nationalists believe that a resounding victory for them at this point would be a mandate for them to hold another referendum on independence, regardless of Boris Johnson's approval or not. And this is where it gets interesting, because if the Nationalists decide to hold a referendum without approval from the Prime Minister, i.e. an illegal referendum within the United Kingdom, then central government will have to decide how to deal with this. Now, I'm sure all eyes will be on how Spain dealt with the Catalonian politicians who did something similar in 2017 by holding an illegal referendum with a view to Catalonia becoming independent from Spain. And now most of those politicians are languishing in Spanish jails. Well, from general politics to the specific. It was a British Prime Minister in the 1970s, Harold Wilson, who coined the phrase that a week in politics is a long time. Well, in Scotland it seems that a day in politics is a long time. So to round off the Scottish political scene, I have to tell you about an impending crisis. To some it's a time to get the popcorn out and watch the spectacle unfold. To others it's a looming crisis for a party, the Scottish National Party, who have been in power now for 13 long years. Let me tell you about it. As we've been discussing, the Scottish National Party is the ruling party, and that's led by Nicola Sturgeon. Her predecessor, to whom she was close, has now become an adversary. It's not that long ago that Mr Salmond, the previous Scottish National Party leader, was arrested and charged with a series of sexual assault charges. He was subsequently cleared after a court case found him not guilty of all charges, except one which was not proven. It's a strange verdict in Scotland, which reputedly means that the jury think that the person may have been guilty, but the Crown has not provided sufficient evidence to prove it, so he is effectively acquitted. And in the last week, a new group and supporters of Mr Salmond have just registered a new political party in Scotland called the Pro-Independence Party. So you can see how convoluted this gets, and clearly the matter of another independence referendum is not going to rest. Where this new party fits in with the SNP is not quite known yet. We'll have to watch this space. Add to that, Mr Salmond has stated that he has documents that could be extremely damaging to Nicola Sturgeon, his former friend, and the current leader of the SNP, and they may come out during a forthcoming investigation into the SNP government's handling of his sex assault case. That inquiry starts on the 18th of August. So a very interesting piece of political drama to come, and I will report on it in my next newsletter. The other parties have their own problems, and the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, Jackson Carlaw, resigned as leader last week, out of the blue. Some in his party suggested that he was pushed perhaps, or wasn't up for the fight with the SNP over the independence debate, and that his leadership lacked bite. Well, within days, a relatively young man, Douglas Ross, stepped into the breach and has now become the leader. However, he is not a Scottish MP and so cannot sit in the devolved Scottish Chamber. So the previous leader of the party, Ruth Davidson, will stand in for him at question times until he can get himself elected as a Scottish MP and officially be crowned the party leader. Now, the national newspaper, which is the Scottish National voice piece if you like, reported by Emma O'Toole, has a headline: Douglas Ross refuses to deny plotting with Ruth Davidson in car crash interview. So as you can see, no love lost between not just the parties, but also the newspapers supporting those parties. The Labour leader has come in for much criticism as well from his own party for a similar lack of fight, charisma and leadership. The other joint leader of the Green Party, who are keeping the SNP in power at the moment in a coalition arrangement, is Patrick Harvie. To my mind, in a true democracy, the opposition are there to challenge the government of the day and hold them to account. Well, from the sidelines I don't see much of that going on, but let's see if I change my mind when the new Conservative Party leader has been in post for another couple of months. Well, I think that's enough on Scottish politics, but I'll keep you updated on progress or not as the months proceed towards the new elections, and especially on the intriguing inquiry within the SNP ranks about to unfold. Now, for my American friends who must have got fed up listening to details of your own election, which brought Donald Trump to power, and the subsequent suggestion that Russians somehow meddled in that election, I have news from home. A report has just been published stating that it was more than likely that the Russians were involved in 2016 in the Brexit referendum. You know, the one asking the British people to vote to stay in or leave the European Union. Well, from this report, it would appear the Russian state was up to its neck in the process, but the scandal is the UK government did nothing about it. They never asked the security forces to investigate, and the issue was brushed under the carpet, allegedly. Well, in Scotland's case, it would appear the Russians were also meddling in the independence referendum mentioned before, so it's all getting a little messy. Add to that, Mr Salmond, the previous leader of the Scottish National Party, actually works for Russia Today, which is a TV programme funded by the Kremlin. I mean, you just couldn't make it up. Mr Salmond was the leader of the SNP and the First Minister during the referendum, so noises are now being made in political circles about what he knew at the time. Well, you'll have to wait to see how this one plays out, but I'll keep you informed. Before we leave the subject of Donald Trump and Mr Salmond, most of you will know that he has Scottish ancestry, as his mother Mary Ann MacLeod was born in the Outer Hebrides. Well, he is clearly proud of his ancestry and has invested heavily, thank you Mr Trump, in the Scottish golf world, where unfortunately controversy has surrounded him. His new course north of Aberdeen, which is north-east Scotland, was mired in controversy from the start, especially as he allegedly was assured by Alex Salmond, the First Minister at the time, that windmills would not be built within sight of his golf course. Well, Mr Trump and Mr Salmond appeared to fall out spectacularly over this, and, in the end, the windmills were built. But it's to his other golf resort in the southwest of Scotland that I want to report. This is the Trump Turnbury Resort, bought in 2014. Now, it appears that the Trump organisation has handed a plan to South Ayrshire Council to build high-end private residential homes for retirement living. And quoting from the independent newspaper online, Jane Dalton, of Sunday 12th of July 2020, the Trump organisation has not yet submitted a formal planning application, so this is all speculation. But even this speculation has resulted in some fairly strong words from those opposed to the proposed plans. I have to say that as Mr Trump has retired from the board of the company, it's his sons that are allegedly presenting this plan to introduce about 225 new homes to the area. Well, whatever the plan, the news of such a proposal has already prompted anger from local people who oppose more development in the area. And they also appear to have the backing of Mr Patrick Harvie, who is a Scottish Member of Parliament and co-leader of the Green Party. He's the one that I mentioned before. He has now come out and questioned President Trump's openness. He is quoted by the independent newspaper as saying, "Trump's personal finances have never been transparent, and rather than letting him help himself to another piece of Scotland's tourism industry, we should be going to court to seek an unobtained wealth order to start casting some light on his business dealings." He also added, the firm had shown itself to be an irresponsible and environmentally damaging developer, as well as a bad neighbour. And that's what he told the paper, which he was urging officials to reject the scheme. But what he went on to say was quite surprising, and my American friends will be interested to hear what he had to say. He said, "Beyond this particular development, we should be very wary of allowing Scotland's reputation to be further associated with the toxic Trump brand. The man himself is a delusional bully, an advocate of climate denial and other dangerous conspiracy theories, and he has actively promoted the views of fascists, including in the UK. Ouch, Patrick, get off that fence and tell us what you really think." Well, I'm glad that I'm only quoting what has been said by Mr Harvie of the Scottish Green Party, and he can be found in Holyrood Parliament Building at the bottom of the Royal Mile for any lawsuits. Apparently, the independent newspaper has asked the Trump organisation to confirm details of the plans and respond to the criticism. So far, nothing has been heard, but once again, I will keep you informed if anything comes up. Let's turn to more happy news now, and a subject that intrigues most countries around the world, the British royal family. Scotland gets a special mention this month because this is the time the Queen and her family normally travel to Scotland for their summer holiday at Balmoral Castle in the Highlands. The story has gained more prominence this year because the city of Aberdeen is only 45 miles from Balmoral, and it has just gone into a second lockdown due to increased cases of COVID-19. Now, lovers of the British royal family and regular watchers of our royals will be horrified that the Queen may be putting herself in danger of this threat so close to our holiday home. Well, I can report that Her Majesty is in safe hands. She flew up to Aberdeen with Prince Philip in a private plane, and having been met at the airport, were then transported by car directly to their Balmoral estate near to Ballater. Actually, the Queen, now 94, and her husband Prince Philip, now 99 years old, have been in isolation for the last 4 months at Windsor Castle, just outside London. They were looked after by a dedicated team of 24 staff who live with them in a sort of bubble. Staff were not allowed to leave the castle grounds, which meant outings to pubs and shops were curtailed. Well, Balmoral has been one of the residences of the British royal family since 1852, when Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert fell in love with the area and bought the Balmoral estate. And this estate has been enjoyed by royals ever since. Well, the Queen normally combines her Scottish break with a spell at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh, where she meets Scottish dignitaries. That is not going to happen this year for obvious reasons. Indeed, this year's holiday at Balmoral will not be like previous stays when visitors from all walks of life, including our Prime Minister, would normally spend the weekend. It looks like it's going to be a family-only approach, and even then a socially distanced set of family visits. My sources tell me that even Harry and Meghan have been invited, but with such a distance to travel and quarantine restrictions in place, it is doubtful they will put in an appearance. Anyway, with the ages of the Queen and Prince Philip, no risks can be taken. Scotland is proud of the royal connection, and it's great for Scotland to have this close personal link with the royal family. And it says something for Scotland that the Queen and the royals in general can feel so welcome, safe and comfortable in such a lovely part of the Highlands. I'm pleased to report the last time a survey was taken about how Scots think about the royal family, there was resounding support. And why should this matter? Well, the independence debate appeared to throw into question if the Queen would remain the Queen of Scots if Scotland became independent. Well, it looks as if the Scottish Constitution has no difficulty with this, and the monarch gets a firm thumbs up from the nationalist leaders thus far. It is not, however, the same support from the nationalists for the English in general, and there has been an unsavoury trend in recent years to criticise them and blame them for Scotland's ills, especially the Westminster Parliament. Of course, this is the national chant, but the reason I bring it up now is that there has been some awful individuals standing on the border between Scotland and England chanting English go home. This is in response to the suggestion by the Scottish National Party government that English travellers to Scotland could be spreading COVID-19. All a bit over the top, but even today there was a banner released in Edinburgh demanding that the English go home. My only hope is that this does not escalate and that the nationalists do not use it as an excuse to rally their supporters in their independence cause. A recent nationalist rally in Glasgow ended by showing the Braveheart film with, as we know, William Wallace shouting freedom as he died at the end of the film. And this is being used by some in the nationalist camp to stir up anti-English feeling. It's sad for two reasons. Firstly, for all its fault, I really enjoyed the film. Secondly, using an almost 800-year-old grievance to break up the United Kingdom is unbecoming of supposedly intelligent Scottish national politicians and could lead to civil unrest. Now, having served for a very short time in Bosnia as a logistics commander, I've seen the aftermath of civil unrest, and it's not pretty, and that is a huge understatement. Well, as I ponder on all these issues, it's at times like these that it would be good to have that deserted island that I mentioned at the beginning of this newsletter. And I could hardly believe my luck when researching for this newsletter that an island on Loch Lomond swam into view. Now, there are over 50 islands, large and small, on Loch Lomond, and only a handful are privately owned where access is restricted. And I want to tell you a lovely story about one woman's fight to save an island from being sold by the local lord, or laird as we say in Scotland, and possible development into a second home for some rich client who would stop anyone from accessing his land. The island in question is called Inchconnecan, and is called Wallaby Island because red-necked wallabies were introduced onto the island by Lady Cahoon in the 1870s, and they still roam wild. The Cahoons own most of the west side of Loch Lomond and have done since the 15th century. Why she brought wallabies is not clear, but it would have been a great talking point at a dinner party. Anyway, It's one of the few places outside Australia which has a viable population of wallabies. The Colquhouns are looking to raise some cash as the island was put up for sale in July with a price tag of £500,000. It's already being suggested that the sale price will reach £1 million. Well, in steps Elise Wiles-Brand, who is trying to save the island she lived on as a child. She now lives in Plymouth in the south of England, but when she heard of the island's sale, she made it her mission to save it from being privatised and therefore inaccessible to the general public. The 28-year-old architect lived on the island between 1995 and 1998, where her father was a warden, and she's keen for others to have the same amazing experience she had as a child. Her dream is to open up this exquisite escape to the local community through an ecotourism hub. What she would not wish to see is the island sold off to a private buyer who would build a second home and use it only occasionally during the year and then close the entire island off to anyone else at any time. Well, to realise her dream of buying the island and converting it to an ecotourism hub with open access to all, she is trying to raise £1 million, and that's what's expected for the sale price. Well, the closing is tomorrow, one day after I post this newsletter, so you will have to wait to find out how she got on. Of course, I, for one, hope she succeeds, as I'd be delighted to move to the island and escape all this madness. But before I go, there is a good news story that will warm the cockles of your heart, and this comes from Sarah Ebner of The Telegraph. She reported that a journalist, Martin Booth, told her a story of an elderly man who was walking down a street in Bristol, and he had stopped, opened his wallet, and all his £10 notes flew out of the wallet in a gust of wind. As the old man looked on horrified, as his money flew off in all directions, instinctively people nearby chased after the money, and soon every last note had been retrieved. Mr Booth then said, a queue then quickly formed around the man as one after the other people handed his money back to him. Mr Booth then stated, the man stood there in shocked silence as the notes were handed back to him. When I gave him the £10 that I had managed to catch under my right foot after a short chase, our eyes briefly met. His face was profoundly grateful for the kindness of a dozen total strangers. So there you go. It sometimes just takes a small number of acts of kindness like that to restore your faith in humanity. And before I finish off, I would like to put out a call specifically to America and your President, Mr Turmp, who I mentioned earlier has Scottish blood, and I'd like him to restore faith in humanity by removing the surtax on Scottish goods, especially single malt Scotch whisky and our famous cashmere and shortbread. As you know, Mr Turmp, the Scots are a hardy race and will not be cowed by threat or invasion, so we are greatly dismayed that someone with Scottish blood would try to damage Scotland's lifeblood, our Scotch whisky, by imposing punitive tariffs. So I call upon any American citizens adversely affected by this idiotic Scotch whisky tax to send this podcast to your President to get him to ease up on our precious whisky industry. You never know, Mr President, you might even get Mr Patrick Harvey to like you. Well, that's it for this month's newsletter. If you have enjoyed it, then share the love and let your friends and contacts know about it. You'll find all my podcasts on exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk or find them on the normal channels such as Spotify, Google, TuneIn, Apple, etc. under the name Unique Scotland. Can I say thank you for all your comments, especially on the Sky and Whisky series of podcasts. Also catch my videos on YouTube under the Unique Scotland brand. You can also see me live on my Facebook page on most weekends. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed this month's newsletter as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Any comments on the stories or on any requests for updates on anything else happening in Scotland, please do drop me a line. I wish you continuing health and happiness, and during these very strange times, stay safe. I raise a glass to you all. Slán Java.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.